The door was already swinging open before she could knock. A large hand reached out from inside, the kind of hand that had spent half a lifetime on a rope, and pushed the plank of pine wide. Behind it stood a man with a brown beard going gray around the mouth. He looked down at her. He looked past her, at the three small shapes pressed against her skirts in the cold. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was rough, the way a man's voice gets after a winter of not using it. "Can I help you?" She was breathing in small, careful pulls. The child at her hip had fallen asleep against her, and the weight of it, plus the weight of the fourth, was more than her legs wanted to carry. "I'm looking for the man who owns this place," she said. "Larson, I was told." "That's me." He didn't move from the doorframe. "Dutch Larson. What do you need?" "Shelter," she said. "For tonight, at least, and maybe longer." He looked at her again, longer this time, and she saw the second his eyes moved from her face to the small dark letters stitched into the shawl over her shoulder. WHATELY. He went still in the doorframe. "Cora Whately," she said. "I believe my husband wrote to you before he passed." The cold air came past him and curled around her ankles. 6 months had passed since Tom Whately had ridden onto the high summer range alone, against Dutch's better judgment, and 6 months since the cairn had been raised on the ridge where his horse had come home riderless. Dutch had written back to the address Tom had carried in his billfold, and the letter had come back unopened, because by the time it arrived, Cora and her children had already moved on to the next town. "Come in," Dutch said. He pulled the door wide. "Come in." She stepped over the threshold, and the warmth of the room hit her in a way that almost knocked her sideways. Hattie, her oldest girl, 7 years old and watchful, was already guiding her mother to the wooden chair just inside the door. Dutch called through the open window to the bunkhouse, where a man with 2 missing fingers and no middle name anyone used was mending a pair of chaps. "Jess, bring a wool blanket." Jess brought the blanket. He didn't ask why. He had seen enough cold women at enough ranch doors to know what one looked like. He looked once at the small boy already asleep on the wolfskin rug and quietly put another folded piece of wool under the girl's head. 6 weeks on the road, Cora said. 2 of them on foot. The freight wagon out of Billings wouldn't take the children. Dutch studied her. He studied the way she held the sleeping baby at her hip, the way her oldest daughter's hand rested on her mother's knee, the way the little boy at her feet had rolled over twice in his sleep and ended up closer to the fire. He had not thought of children in this house in a long time. The bunkhouse had been for Jess and the hired men, the kitchen for himself, and the silence for too many hours in a row. "Where is your husband buried?" Hattie asked very quietly. "Maggie," Cora began. "No, that's all right," Dutch said. He leaned down a little, the way a man leans when a child is 2 feet shorter than he is and afraid of him. "Up on the ridge, west of here, where you can see the snow line, there's a cairn. I'll take you when the weather lets us." Hattie nodded once and looked down at her hands. "Where will we sleep tonight?" Hattie asked. "We'll think of something," Dutch said. He went to the stove. He put a kettle on, although he did not have tea. In the silence between them, he said, "Tom wrote me a letter the week before he died. He said if anything happened to him, I was to look after his family. I wrote back, but you had already moved on." "Yes," Cora said. "I am here now." "Tom's share of the brand is still yours," Dutch said. "It's been yours all winter. I'll show you the books in the morning. But tonight you need to sleep." She looked at him then, in the careful way of a woman who has learned not to look too long at men who are being kind, in case kindness turns out to be something else. He didn't look away. There was no charity in his face and no calculation. There was only a man who had been waiting, without quite knowing what he had been waiting for. "Thank you, Mr. Larson," she said. "Dutch," he said. "Thank you, Dutch. If you are listening tonight from a kitchen table, a back porch, a rocker beside a window, or a long quiet room with a quilt over your knees, I would love to hear where you are. Leave a comment and tell me, because the company we keep on nights like this one matters as much as the story." It was a question and an answer both. The only one that needed to hear it was sitting on the wolfskin rug with her daughters, in the only kitchen in 40 miles that smelled of wood smoke and pine sap. This was what was broken. a woman at the end of her rope, 3 children asleep before the snow even noticed they had come, and a man in a doorway who had just learned the name his dead partner had asked him to look after. The morning came clear and cold. Dutch walked her to the brand office, a small outbuilding with a chimney shorter than the kitchen's, and showed her Tom's ledger. The W on the left rib of every calf meant Whately. There were 48 of them out in the spring pasture, plus the older cows and the bred heifers. The numbers were small for a cattle operation, but in this part of the country, where the winters killed off half of every drover's stock, small was how a man stayed alive. Tom put you down for half, Dutch said. In the partnership papers. I didn't know there were partnership papers, Cora said. He filed them in Hardin, Dutch said. I have the record. You are half owner as of last spring. He signed it the morning he headed for the high range. She did not say anything for a long time. She let her hand rest on the page. The handwriting was her husband's. She recognized it from the grocery lists he had left on the kitchen table in better years, the ones with the crooked M on the milk line. Her face did something complicated that a man who had not been paying attention would have missed entirely. Half, she said at last. Half, Dutch said. You'll need to sign the brand book. That makes it real in front of the cattle. The boys in the valley don't argue with the brand book. And the cabin? She said. Part of the partnership property, he said, coming with the brand. The bunkhouse is also yours, technically, but I would prefer you take the main house. There's a bedroom off the kitchen that's warmer than anything Jess and I have set up. You are being very kind, Mr. Larson. Dutch. You are being very kind, Dutch. He went red around the ears, the way a man goes red who has not been on the receiving end of gratitude in a long time. I am doing what Tom asked me to do, he said. Anything else would be a sin. That's a strange way to start a morning, she said. It's the only way I know how, he said. By the end of the day, word was out. The town of Cedar Spur was 9 miles east, down the valley, and the town had the kind of telegraph that men gathered around at dusk the way other towns gather around church. The news reached the saloon before sunset. Dutch Larson took in a widow, somebody said, with 3 brats, and 1 more on the way. Mrs. Whalen, the preacher's wife, rode out the next morning. She brought a basket of bread and a worried expression, and she sat at the kitchen table while Dutch was outside feeding. She waited until Dutch's rough voice was far enough away that it would not carry. You understand the position this girl has put Mr. Larson in, Mrs. Whalen said. I beg your pardon? Cora said. He is a single man, 43 years of age, a member of this congregation. If people see him taking in a family without the benefit of clergy, they will talk. They are already talking. Are they talking about him? Or about me? About both of you, Mrs. Whalen said. Whately was his partner. That is not the same as a marriage. People will read into this. Let them read, Cora said. Her voice was quiet and level. My husband died on a range Mr. Larson warned him not to ride. He wrote a letter Mr. Larson tried to answer. Mr. Larson is honoring the only promise that matters. The rest is between him and God and me. Mrs. Whalen got on her horse a half-hour later, with the bread uneaten. Cora poured the bread into a bowl for the children and buttered it with a steady hand. She was not going to be the kind of woman who let a stranger's worry cost her children their breakfast. Dutch came in from the cold. He had heard nothing. The children fed themselves and asked no questions, and the smallest one ate with both hands, the way babies do when no one has told her yet that it is unladylike, and Dutch watched the baby with the same unhurried look Hattie had shown him the night before. A slow, careful study of someone he had not known he was going to need. A week passed. The snow came early. The roof over the bedroom leaked in the corner above the bed, and Dutch climbed up on a clear morning with cedar shakes and a mallet and fixed it without being asked. Cora watched him from the kitchen window. He was not a young man. He climbed carefully, the way a man climbs when his right knee began to lock up for winters ago. When he came down, his hands were shaking from the wind, and he had blood on one knuckle from a piece of cedar that had split. You didn't have to do that, she said. I did, he said. The shingles were loose. Just the shingles? She said. He went to wash his hands, and the answer went with him where it would stay for a while. Hollis Crane came on the second Tuesday of November, riding 2 horses ahead of a hired man who stayed at the gate. Hollis was 54 and had been buying cattle land in the Powder Valley for 10 years. He had more money than he needed and less land than he wanted, and the hunger he could not satisfy was for water. The fork of the Powder that ran through Dutch's property fed 3 ranches below, including his own, and he had been trying to buy it since 1878. He rode up to the porch in a good coat. He tipped his hat to Cora, who came to the door at the sound of the horses. He tipped his hat to Hattie, who was sitting on the step reading a schoolbook whose cover was held shut with a piece of twine. "Dutch," he said, when Dutch came around the corner of the barn. "I heard you've taken on a family." "I have," Dutch said. "Well," Hollis said, "that's a piece of news. I hope this changes your mind about the price I offered you last summer." "It does not," Dutch said. "I can pay more," Hollis said. "I can pay cash. I can pay it before the next frost. Whatever your man here would have settled for, I can offer his widow twice. It's the water I want. You keep the cattle." "I am keeping the water," Dutch said. "Dutch," Hollis said. His voice went smoother, no rougher than a creak over a flat stone. "I'm a patient man, but Winter knows how to be patient too. You think about it. I will check back after the first snow." He rode off. Cora had heard the second half of it through the kitchen wall. She recognized a particular silence, the silence a man adopts around another man who has more money and more men. She had heard her husband keep that silence for years. She set a pot of soup on the stove and stood with one hand against her back and the other on the ladle, and she did not say a word. She was braiding Hattie's hair by the fire that evening when she said, almost to herself, "Funny how a man's name keeps doing work long after he's gone." Dutch made no answer. There was nothing to add to that. The town had its own chorus now. Mr. Whalen had it out with the preacher. The cattlemen at the saloon said things about Dutch that they were sober enough not to say to his face. The storekeeper sent a note. The doctor's wife sent a jar of rendered fat for the baby's bottom. "I would like to ask you something, while the night is still turning. If you were in Dutch's place that morning, with 3 children asleep on your floor and a woman so far along in her pregnancy that she leaned against the doorframe like a tree about to fall, would you have answered her knock, knowing what it could cost you in a small town? Tell me in the comments, because I read them, and the answers you give me stay with me." The storm came for the land first. Tuesday morning, 14 days after Hollis's visit, a deputy from the territorial court rode up to the cabin. He was a small man with a square jaw and a paper folded into 3. Dutch was outside cutting wood. Cora was inside mending a tear in the smallest one's shirt. "Mr. Larson," the deputy said, "are you the party of record on this property?" "I am," Dutch said. "And your partner, deceased?" "Also party of record," Dutch said. "I have a complaint filed by Mr. Hollis Crane," the deputy said, claiming the original 1874 filing for this property was improperly recorded in Musselshell County, and that the land was therefore open to refiling under the Homestead Act as of last spring. Mr. Crane filed on the first day the office in Cedar Spur reopened. He holds the new record. "This property has been in continuous family occupation since 1874, Dutch said. "Then we will need to see the original filing receipt," the deputy said. "You have 30 days to produce it. If you cannot, the refiling stands." The deputy handed him the paper. He did not wait around for a reaction. He knew how the geography of these disputes ran, and he knew that the man who paid his salary had a brother-in-law who was one of Hollis's drivers. Dutch walked inside. He set the paper on the kitchen table and stood with both hands on the wood. Cora looked at the paper, then at him. "He is trying to take our land," she said. "He is trying to take our water," Dutch said. "The land is what holds it. If he gets the land, the water follows." "Where is the original receipt?" "In the office," Dutch said. "Tom and I put it in a tin behind the brand books on the day we filed." He went to the office. He came back in less than a minute. His face had changed. "It's not there," he said. "What do you mean it's not there?" "The tin is there. The receipt is not. The brand books are there. The receipt is not." Jess was out on the spring line. Dutch sent Hattie, who had been riding since she was 9, on the fastest horse in the barn, to bring him back. Jess came in 20 minutes later. "Office was broken into," he said. "I checked the lock. The wood around the hasp is fresh shaved. Within the past 2 weeks." "Hollis," Cora said. "Hollis," Dutch said. That night, Hollis's riders came. They crossed the property at the southern fence, cutting through a corner stretch, and they drove 33 head of cattle out under the moonlight. The calves bawled. The cows bellowed. The dog barked until Hattie let him out, and then he barked until he caught one of the riders' horses by the fetlock and was kicked into the brush. Jess and Dutch rode out at first light with rifles. They did not find the cattle. They did find a man on Dutch's land, carrying a McClellan saddle with a Crane brand on the cantle. The man said he was on the wrong range. The man said he was sorry. The man was gone before Dutch could write down his name. 2 days later, a stack of winter hay, 3 months of feed for 48 cattle, went up in a fire that started at the leeward corner and burned, the way fires do in the dry country, against the wind. The wind was wrong, the locals said, the next morning. The wind was always wrong, the locals said, when the locals wanted to be wrong. The space for quiet moral choice was collapsing. There were now 3 problems on the ranch, and none of them had a gentle answer. The legal claim was 14 days closer to landing. The herd was 10% smaller. The winter feed was a third of what it needed to be. Then, on the 11th day, one of them opened. A storm came through on a Wednesday night, the kind that drops 2 feet of snow in 12 hours, and Dutch and Jess were out in the morning digging out the lower herd. In the cabin, Cora was sorting through a chest of Tom's old things she had finally sent up from Hardin at the back of the freight wagon. Tom's saddlebags, Tom's old Bible, Tom's ledger from the first year of the brand. The ledger was a small black book, soft leather, with a clasp that no longer caught. She opened it. Tom had kept it from the first spring on the ranch, when there were only 11 head and an unfenced claim and a man with a borrowed wagon. The first pages had drawings of brands and tally marks that meant cattle sold and calves branded. The middle pages had cattle counts and weather notes. The back pages had been left blank, waiting for end-of-year totals where the partnership would eventually sit. She turned to the back. A piece of paper had been folded carefully into the inside of the back cover, the way a man folds something he wants to keep long enough to forget he is keeping it. She unfolded it. It was the original filing receipt, yellowed with a court stamp from the county seat, signed by a clerk whose name she could not pronounce. Folded and kept by Tom because Tom had not trusted bankers, and had not trusted saloons, and had not, in the end, trusted the filing cabinet in his own office. She walked out into the snow with it in her hand. Dutch was leading a horse up by the bridle. He looked at her. She held out the paper. "The receipt," she said. Dutch took it. He read the seal. He looked at her. He didn't speak for a long moment. "Tom knew," he said. "He knew this could come. He knew to keep it." "He knew something was coming," she said. "He just didn't know when." It did not solve the dilemma. The receipt proved the original filing. But the deputy had already told them the judge would want to see it in person, in the county seat, on a date after the 30 days were up. The receipt bought them time. It did not buy them peace. Hollis would bring witnesses of his own. The judge, who owed his appointment to men with money and men with cattle and men like Hollis, would weigh every word. The deepest storm came that night, in the cabin, while the wind howled under the eaves. Cora's water broke. She did not say a word. She sat up in bed, swung her feet to the floor, and made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a cry, and was the kind of sound a woman makes when she knows the body has finally taken over from the will. Dutch woke up. "What is it?" he said. "It's now," she said. He went to the door. He knocked on the wall with his fist 3 times, and Jess, who slept light as a cat, was up in a heartbeat. He saddled the horse and rode into the storm for Maeve Donnelly, the nearest neighbor, who had caught her own 3 children and her sister-in-law's 2 and had buried 2 of her own sons, and was the kind of woman a man rides for in the middle of a storm when there is no doctor within 30 miles. Maeve came back with Jess in 3 hours. The wind was so bad they had to lead the horse part of the way, and Maeve had a face like cut granite by the time she stepped inside. The baby came at first light. He was small. He cried. Cora held him against her shoulder and closed her eyes and said nothing at all. They named him Sam, because Sam was the name of Tom's older brother, who had died in the war, and Cora held his small hand against her cheek and said the name twice to be sure it fit. Dutch had not been in the cabin through the worst of it. Maeve had sent him out to the kitchen for hot water 3 times in a row, because she believed a woman did not need a man standing over her while she worked, and Dutch had stood at the stove with his back to the wall, his hands steady on the kettle and his heart heaving like a horse at the end of a long run. When it was over, Maeve came to the doorway and said, in a voice that carried no decoration, "Mother and child are well," and Dutch went in. The baby weighed about 5 pounds. He was the smallest living creature Dutch had been within arm's length of in his life, and he held him the way Maeve told him to hold him, with the head in the crook of his elbow and the body along his forearm, and he looked at Cora, and Cora looked at him, and neither of them said what was true or obvious, because they were going to have to go on living in the same kitchen for a while yet. Hattie came in first. She stood at the foot of the bed and looked at her brother with an expression Dutch had not seen on a child since his own sister had looked at him one afternoon when she came home from the schoolhouse and said, very quietly, "Pa's gone." Hattie put one finger against the baby's fist and let him grip it. "He's so little," she said. "He's the right size," Dutch said. "Trust me." The boy they called Tug, for the way he had pulled himself off the wolfskin rug the morning Cora had arrived, climbed up beside Hattie and lay his head against her arm and fell asleep without seeing the baby at all. Maeve put a kettle on. She stirred something into a cup of warm milk and a spoonful of honey and gave it to Cora, and Cora drank it with both hands, and the room smelled of wood smoke and tallow and the iron of a woman's body working its way back from labor. "Neighborhood sent word by way of my husband," Maeve said while she cleaned up. "Folks heard about Mr. Crane. There is a sack of flour at my back porch, a smoked ham, 2 of them, and a quilt that switches colors. The loan officer at the store in Cedar Spur says he will extend Mr. Larson's credit through the spring on Tom Whately's old signature. Tom paid every bill from the first year. The bank knows it." "Tom," Cora said. "Tom," Maeve said. The kindness had nothing to do with Dutch being Dutch. It had to do with Tom being Tom, and the town understanding the difference. Dutch knew he could use this opportunity. With the receipt in hand and the deputy already in the picture, he could go further. He could file a counter-complaint against Hollis for tampering with a public filing. He could send Jess and Hattie to the territorial lawyer, who was, by long chance, the same family as the man Hollis had tried to take a homestead from 2 ranches north. He could turn the receipt into a weapon, and Hollis into a defendant, and Hollis's wider land scheme into an open record. He chose not to. He filed the receipt properly. He sent a copy to the judge on a Tuesday, in a plain envelope with a 1-paragraph statement of facts and no embellishment. He did not mention Hollis's hired men. He did not mention the stolen cattle. He did not mention the hay. The receipt was enough. The hay was a separate matter, between him and the men who had burned it, and he would settle that one with a foreman and a long ride when the time came. Maeve came by 3 days later. Dutch was on the porch, splitting cedar. Maeve stood at the gate for half a minute before she spoke. "You could have ruined him," she said. "Anyone else in this valley would have." "He ruined himself when he lied about Tom," Dutch said. He kept splitting wood. Maeve watched him for another moment, then walked back to her horse. That night, the baby asleep in a cradle Hattie and Maeve had rigged out of an apple crate. The others asleep in the next room. Dutch sat by the fire with his forehead against his fists. "I should have ridden with him," he said. Cora was on the rug beside him. She did not look at him. She let the silence go on long enough that the fire popped twice. "I know," she said. "I knew before you did. Maggie told me the day after Tom didn't come home. Maggie had seen him at the chuck wagon that morning. He had told her he was going to ride high, because the grass was up there and the steers had pushed north. Maggie said the man who drove the chuck wagon tried to talk him out of it. The man who tried to talk him out of it was you." Dutch did not say anything for a long time. "I rode 5 days in the cold," he said. "I went up there after. I went through a storm to look. There was nothing I could do by the time I got there." "Cora," he said, He used her name for the first time. I went up there to bring him home. The cairn was already built. It was built by the men who found him. They had ridden up in the morning and walked the long grass until they found him. He was in a wash by a creek. Cora put one hand on his wrist. He looked at her hand. It was the first time she had touched him. You rode 5 days in the cold to find a man who was already gone, she said. That is how you were there. You don't owe him anything else. He did not speak. The fire popped again. He had walked a long way to bring a stranger home, and had woken up that morning holding the smallest of her children against his shoulder, and figured one more hard conversation was something a man could still manage. If the story has lived in you the way it has lived in me while I was writing it, would you do me the kindness of a like and a subscribe? It is the small thing that lets a story like this one find its way back to you every week. I am grateful for you, every single one of you, in a town I can almost see from here. The judge came out in April, on a Tuesday when the wind was warm and the spring calves were running alongside their mothers in the lower pasture. His name was Hatcher. He was 68 and tired and had been a lawyer in the territory for 34 years. He set up a desk in the kitchen of the cabin. There was no other place on the property fit for an official proceeding, and he was the kind of official who did not care about his comfort as long as the facts were on the table. The receipt was on the table. The W. Brand book was on the table. A piece of cedar shake with the property number on it, hammered into the barn by Tom's own hand in 1876, was on the table. The judge read each document and looked out the window at the spring pasture and looked at Hattie, who was on the porch with the baby on her hip, and at Dutch, who was standing near the stove the way a man stands when he has been waiting for a long time and is determined not to show it. The original filing is valid, the judge said. Hollis's lawyer, who had ridden up from the county seat on the same buggy as the judge because the lawyer and the judge shared a sister-in-law and had done so for 30 years, opened his mouth. Mr. Hatcher. The original filing is valid, Mr. Headley. The new filing by your client is invalid, as it was based on a misstatement of fact. The property remains with Mr. Larson and the estate of Mr. Whately. I will so order at the bench in 2 weeks. Good day. He packed up his papers. He shook Dutch's hand. He shook Cora's hand. He looked at the baby on Hattie's hip and said, "A fine boy." He got on his buggy and drove off down the valley road. Hollis's lawyer went off the other way, with dust rising behind him. Nothing more was said. The territory attorney's office quietly opened an inquiry into Hollis's broader filings. Through the summer, 3 other homesteaders along the Powder had their records reviewed, and in 2 of those cases, the new filings were found invalid as well. Hollis did not go to prison. He went into retreat in his house in Miles City for 2 seasons, and he sold down his cattle by half, and the next spring he took a trip out to Oregon to look at some property he had heard about on the Willamette. He was not ruined. He was made quietly, thoroughly, and unmistakably irrelevant to this valley. Dutch had not lifted a finger against him. The records and the receipts and the law had done their work, and Hollis had done the rest on his own. The quiet reckoning of a man who has just stopped matching is more absolute, in some places, than the louder kind. In Cedar Spur, the buckboard men at the saloon stopped saying Hollis's name out loud. They said the man up the valley instead. 6 months later they said nothing at all. Spring into summer. Dutch and Cora were not yet married. They were quietly a family. Tug learned to ride before he learned to read, on a small black mare Jess had bought for the price of a good rifle and a length of soft rope. Hattie rode in the spring roundup alongside Jess and Dutch, on her own horse named after her mother, which Cora had not been entirely sure was a compliment at first, but had decided it was. The baby, Sam, spent his mornings on the porch in a wooden box that had once held apples, and he watched the calves and the chickens and the dog with the steady gaze of a person who has not yet decided what to make of the world, but intends to give it a fair hearing. He has her coloring and my patience, Dutch said one evening on the porch to Cora. He said it as though it were only weather talk. Cora said nothing, and that was how he knew she had heard what he had said underneath it. Mrs. Whalen came back in August with a different basket. This one had cinnamon rolls in it. She did not explain herself. She set the basket on the table, kissed the baby's head, and asked whether Hattie had any schoolwork she wanted to look at over the winter, because Mrs. Whalen had been a teacher in another life. Hattie looked up from her book. "I would like that," she said. "Yes, ma'am." It was autumn again. 3 years past the night a woman had knocked on a door in front of which a man had been waiting without knowing what he was waiting for. The cabin had a new wing, added in the spring by Jess and a man who had ridden down from Billings for the price of a steer and a good meal. 5 children sat on the porch that evening, including the baby who had been born into a snowstorm and who now rode out to the spring pasture on Jess's saddle before breakfast. There were calves on the spring grass that bore 2 letters run together into one, and an old man on the porch with a chair his partner had been keeping for him, and a woman in the doorway who had walked 1,000 miles with a name she had been given. Funny thing about a name, she had learned. You carry it for a while and then it starts carrying you. If this story has kept some warmth in you tonight, stay close. Next week, the bell over the mercantile in a town called Hartwell rings for a stranger who has come a long way to claim a debt, and the man behind the counter does not yet want to hear what she has to say. He is going to have to listen. I think she is going to change everything he believes about Mercy. Until then, stay warm, stay kind, and if there is a name you have been carrying longer than you planned tonight, set it down for a moment. You have carried it long enough. Good night.